Welcome to EdUp Smart Space, the future of campus technology, the podcast where we explore the emerging trends at the intersection of education, technology, and the built environment. Hello, I'm Craig Park, your host. Today's guest is a true navigator of the EdTech frontier, Rhea Kelly, editor-in-chief of Campus Technology, The Journal, and Spaces for Learning. Rhea brings deep insight into how AI, learning spaces, and educational tech interact and interconnect. I hope you are ready to dive into what should be a very insightful conversation. Rhea, welcome to the show. Could you please give the audience a little bit about your background and what led you to your editorial role today?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun. One of my favorite things to do is talk to people about these topics. So this is great. My background was traditional print magazines. I fell in love with print media. I won't say how many years ago. Um, I started out working for a health and fitness magazine company called Weeder Publications. So they published Shape, Men's Fitness, Fit Pregnancy. At the time, Shape was the number 3 women's magazine in the country. So that's how I got my toe into publishing and being an editor. And then over time, when you're an editor, you become an expert by working on the thing that you're working on. So I'm not a fitness expert, but I sure learned a lot about it working at Shape. And then the same thing really happened when I transitioned over to my first magazine in this space was Campus Technology, covers technology in higher education. I've been doing that for about 20 years and really just interacting with folks in the field and writing and learning and speaking about this stuff. It's amazing how much you absorb just being immersed in it. But I'm always very careful to say I'm definitely not an expert. My background's not in education. It's not even in technology. But as an editor, my background is in being like a sponge, being that observer and noticing patterns and trends and keeping your finger on the pulse and that sort of thing. So that's what I love to do. I love to be an expert observer. Actually, I think working in the education field is especially great for that because of the people and the culture. Higher education and education in general, there's this strong culture of collaboration and sharing ideas. And people are always just so incredibly generous in sharing their expertise and their experiences. And they want to talk about the lessons they learned from projects. And what I love especially is that they'll share the good and the bad. And really the bad, the challenges, there's so much you can learn from that. And if you can grant me a little tangent. So an example of that sharing of challenges, we host a virtual event twice a year called Tech Tactics in Education. And last May, one of the sessions was presented by a retired CTO from a school district that had suffered a cybersecurity breach. And the whole point of the session was to walk people through, here are the steps we took and what we experienced in recovering from this breach. And she gave this amazing visual that I will just never forget. Her team was hunting down computers, from school to school just to see what was the scope of the attack, what does recovery look like? And they were finding computers everywhere. And they found hardware that was like in a trash can that was being used to store wet umbrellas. So I don't know, that just like wet umbrellas, my goodness. And it's such like a yes, such a great lesson, like, hey, you might not be as on top of all of your IT assets as you think you are, and that could be a problem when you're faced with a cyber attack. And then also like, hey, maybe you should have wet umbrellas factor into your classroom design and come up with a better place for them. But yeah, and you, Craig, you also had a great panel discussion
Well,
at that
thank you. Yeah, I
same
would say
event.
that was a great conference. And you and I have worked together now for a couple of years as a contributor and now as a part of the editorial advisory group. And really appreciate the work you do and all of the journal, Campus Technology and Spaces for Learning. And I really like that term, expert observer. Um, much like myself, I'm an architect by training. I was not a technologist. I have no real engineering background other than the calculus and physics that they make you take as a young architectural student. But I interned for, excuse me, technology consultant. And I really fell in love with the idea of what they were doing. That was, how do you integrate technology, working in collaboration with the architects who were their clients, to make that connection and collaboration communication better. So now my span now of 46 years, I'm counting, since I graduated and came into the practice, has really been one of an applied observer, if you will, taking what I've learned and trying to find the best practices and learning from those same mistakes. I love those stories of how can we do that, learn from that. After years of following this space, what shifts have you seen in technology related infrastructure and pedagogy that stand out to you?
When I'm thinking about shifts in EdTech, it really makes me think of the things that were once considered innovative or experimental at the time, and then how today those things have just become like the baseline of the student experience. One of the things that I immediately thought of in the early 2000s, Duke University was giving iPods to every student, and they got so much attention, so much media attention. It was so novel. They were experimenting with how iPods could be used to enhance teaching and learning, and like not even iPhones, iPods.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of discourse about it. At the time, people were wondering things like, if students can download lectures onto their iPods, why would they even come to class? But today, the vast majority of students are bringing smartphones to school, and actually multiple devices. I think there's a statistic out there. I don't know what the source is, but it gets bandied around a lot that every student brings at least 7 devices to school. And, they expect to be able to use those devices to interact with their institution for all kinds of purposes, even, from accessing their course materials in the LMS, getting IT support, sometimes even accessing things like mental health support. So, what a world when it was such an experimental thing in the 2000s, and now it's just a given.
Well, and to that point, I can remember having worked on projects where, and I joked about this recently, I can remember when I wasn't allowed to bring my slide rule to class. And then I wasn't allowed to bring my calculator to class. Or I wasn't, and I remember when the first digital assistants and then iPads or tablets of any form and then laptops were considered that's going to interrupt the student's ability to learn. And now I think we've come to the realization that having those tools, to your point, I think that the expectation, particularly I've made this point before in writing and speaking, is that the digital natives, the what I call the late millennials, Z, and now alpha generations that are in school or coming into colleges are truly digital and didn't experience the analog. You and I are old enough to say we had analog experiences. Mine a little older than yours, not quite horse and buggy, but pretty close. And so it's interesting to watch that transition of the faculty adapting, who were, to the most part, still tenured faculty, tend to be of a generation that grew up through analog learning processes, and how their shift to more active problem-based learning has changed the way classrooms are designed, how technology is integrated into that classroom. And a lot of that is shown in your magazines. How do you look for content how do you assess what people are wanting to hear, wanting to read?
That is definitely tricky. I get a barrage of content emailed to me every day. I'm on a million lists, and it's a good thing and a bad thing. My email inbox has something like 40,000 unread messages in it because I'm really also bad at filing things away. I keep everything because really my email is like a database of
You're right.
just every, possible piece of information that has been sent to me. And if I'm looking for a particular topic, I search it and then I find, ideally people who can help me with that topic. So I get a lot of information pushed my way. I also like to follow conferences, industry associations, what's being talked about out there. And luckily, especially in the education field, that's a big thing, going and presenting in conferences. So it's a very helpful thing for me to be able to keep a finger on the pulse. And then I talk to people, and just anytime I talk to people, I learn something about what they're thinking about. We also have several advisory
Mhm.
boards for our different publications.
Right.
I can poll those people, and I do, to find out like what are the hot topics here, who should I be talking to, that kind of stuff. And then really, I just try to channel our readership. It's like when you ask AI to give
Yeah,
you an answer and you want us in a certain way, and you'll say, pretend that
yeah,
you're
yeah.
the editor
Right.
of campus technology. What would you
Mhm.
say in this situation? Or what does my reader want to hear about? And then certain things these days, it makes it pretty easy. AI is so unbelievably hot. It's like you can do no wrong in following the stories on that trend.
Absolutely. And that leads me to my next question, which was let's talk about AI. You recently hosted episodes on campus innovation around AI, from literacy to generative AI. What's the top of the list for you this year?
Well, for me, um, it's actually something old that is new again, and that's chatbots. So, I'm sure you know chatbots have been around for a really long time, but generative AI has completely changed the way they work, which actually I learned just from talking to CIOs who had built the chatbots for their own institutions. So, in the past, for a chatbot, you would have kind of a knowledge base of answers, kind of a pre established list of answers. Then the chatbot would sort of take the questions, match them up with the answers, and then spit out, the answers to questions, which is not really a generative AI function. It's maybe a pattern matching function. But now you can simply, I mean, it's not simple, but you train a generative AI model on a bunch of institutional data. Then the chatbot can come up with the answers on its own, just based on all that data, and actually does a surprisingly good job of sort of integrating the data from different sources to come up with answers you didn't think it would know. So it can do that just based on the data. And then also, if you need to give it more information, you don't need to code in more questions and answers. You just feed it more data. So I think it's a really compelling use for generative AI, partly because, when you limit it to internal data like that, you could really have a good control over the quality of the data that it's drawing from. And so the chatbot should be able to provide very good answers. And there are lots of examples of it, of that working very well at institutions.
I agree. Julie Johnston or Praxis AI was a guest on episode 12 of this show, speaking to that trend. Praxis AI developed an agentic twin specifically for the campus knowledge base applications.
We, as an architectural firm, have 80 years worth of knowledge in project files of every kind of building we've ever designed, including all the engineering and architectural and code calculations. And all of that could be tapped into as the senior mentor to the young architects working in the firm, who, when they're asking a question about what else have we done like this? What challenges have you heard about AI from your readership or your authors that would people should think about?
Well, there have been some interesting challenges for people building those chatbots. I did an interview with, I think it was Bryant University. This was a little over a year ago, so I think things have probably advanced even further by now. But they built a chatbot and they were feeding it data from basically all their public-facing university websites. So easy, the data is already public, so you don't have to worry about privacy concerns. And the answers that the chatbot was giving for things like, I don't know, the name of a building or questions like where do I find food on campus or anything like that. It was bringing up some outdated information that it actually made them realize that their public facing websites, weren't as clean and up to date as they thought. And so it became an interesting challenge of scrubbing data sources across campus because data, you can think it's clean, but is it AI clean? That's a term
Mm,
that I did not come up with, but I love it. I think it's like
yeah,
such
that's a good one.
a good one. But I also wanted to say, in the conversations that I've had with the people building these chatbots, one thing I've thought was really interesting is that the student engagement with these tools is very high. Students don't want, or today's students anyway, they don't want to have to call a university office on the phone to ask a question. And they don't want to be limited to the office hours of like 9 to 5. And so if they can hop on their mobile device and get an answer from a chatbot anytime, is such a huge benefit. And they don't have like the judgment of a person, like, is this a stupid question that I'm asking? Or if they, is this a question that makes me uncomfortable? Like, I want to be anonymous when I'm asking about what the mental health resources are or something like that. So, yeah, it's just another reason I think chatbots are becoming just such an important resource for students.
And talking to your authors and the people that you're uh, talking to at universities and colleges and K-12 as well, how are you seeing these technology shifts towards AI driving different learning space models? Have you seen the impact on of how they're describing classrooms?
I think it's very much in flux. So it's kind of hard to know. I mean, I can think about like what you don't want. So if AI is being integrated into coursework or stuff in the classroom, does that mean every student needs a computer? And is our classroom becoming just rows of desks and computers? Because certainly we don't want that. But what I think about the way AI is impacting learning is that the more AI is integrated into the tools you're using for teaching and learning, it almost puts that time with the teacher at an even higher premium. When you're in the classroom with the teacher, I think the focus should be, how do we maximize that time in the classroom? How do we make it super hands-on and collaborative? And so maybe AI is not in the classroom. Maybe it's everywhere else, and then once you get to the classroom, you're really, like, getting that good hands-on time. But that approach to using the classroom, that's been around for a while. We've got, like,
Mhm.
active learning classrooms.
Right.
So I think we kinda know how to do that. It's just a matter of, I guess, prioritizing that even more.
One of the things I heard recently, and we have not applied it yet, so this is still theoretical, is that in concept, we could tie the setup for a particular class moment, that hour or 50 minutes or whatever the class period is, to that professor's preferences in terms of how they would like their classroom to be arranged or set up or what technology be available or what, if any, hybrid connectivity they might have, because that's become a major concern in the planning we do now is for designing for students that are in class as well as those students who are not able to be in class but want to participate on a reasonably equitable basis. But to have all of that simply based on that professor's particular preferences of how those are set up and how they teach, which becomes something that AI should be able to do combined with the control systems that we're designing that are smart enough to take the direction from an AI. I think looking at next year's InfoComm, to be interesting to see how that works itself out. You talked a little bit about how AI helps with student engagement. What facilities and technology setups are supporting equity and inclusivity that you see?
Just to keep going on the AI side,
Yeah.
I touched on it a little bit already, but, the fact that there's less pressure interacting with AI, there's not a human staring you down and, judging your answers or judging your questions. But also, if you're doing an AI tool that's really more of like a teaching assistant, that can enable unlimited practice. You can like talk to the AI as long as you want, get unlimited variations of problem sets or whatever that you're working on. Uh, you're getting that support at all hours. So I think a lot of that goes well in the equity area. Um, but well, there is also still a lingering equity issue around access. You have to have internet access to use these tools. That's still an issue in some areas. And you also have to have, there are free AI tools, but do they work as well as the paid ones? So that's definitely an equity issue there. The cost of the internet access and the quality AI that is becoming, pretty central to the learning experience. It's kind of a must-have, but there is sort of a digital divide continuing there.
It's AI driven as opposed to hardware driven. And I know a lot of campuses do provide either underwriting for the cost of hardware or the cost of computers and other tools. I would think that investing in AI access would be number one in their minds for budgets for the future as to how do we provide that. Again, it goes back to how much do we allow for outside connection to AI resources versus the ones we control in-house through a LMS or uh, fabricated specifically for that school or that learning body.
Right. Well, and there certainly are, universities doing rollouts, where they provide, like Arizona State University was one of the first ones. Huge ChatGPT rollout, making it available to everyone, students and faculty. So I think they're definitely sort of on the right track. What students are going to need to succeed.
Yeah. So we know that policy lags behind innovation. We talked a little bit about this, but what are you hearing about institutional guidance for AI and learning spaces? What are the guardrails that are being put around AI?
I love this topic, partly because I'm not a technical person, but when I think about governance and strategies and frameworks, that's like my wheelhouse. So one of the pieces of advice I would say it's similar to advice you get in the cybersecurity realm, which is find a framework and then follow it. There are so many frameworks out there. One that just recently came out from the University of Kansas. They came out with a framework for responsible AI implementation. They worked with the US Department of Education on it. And I like it because it's pretty simple. It only has 4 recommendations, but I'll sort of walk through them briefly. First of all, establish a stable, human centered foundation. So I think that's super important. They say don't rely on AI to make decisions, definitely prioritize human judgment. AI can help identify a student that may be struggling in school, but a human should be the one who determines the proper interventions. That makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Number 2, implement future-focused strategic planning for AI integration. So having a plan, it's funny that but
Craig is
it's
applauding in the background.
right? And that involves, have a formalized task force or a steering committee or some sort of like a group that brings the stakeholders together. Make sure you get all the stakeholders. I like to say that should include students too. Just get everyone together. And you're going to be doing that like risk analysis, setting goals, prioritizing the tools that align with those goals. So yeah, that kind of strategic planning piece very important. Number 3, ensure AI educational opportunities for every student. So this goes to that equity piece,
Equity.
making sure AI tools meet accessibility requirements, things like multiple means of content access, multiple options for students to respond, customizable support so that, when people have different accessibility needs, they still have access to using those tools. And then the 4th recommendation is conduct ongoing evaluation, professional learning, and community development. So, yeah, it's another one. Training, training, training. Everyone needs the training. Students need it, teachers too. That's just incredibly important. So, yeah, that was the 4 things from University of Kansas. And then I think I would just add the importance of transparency. Just like everyone needs to know what the plan is, what the guidelines are, what the rules are. There was an interesting survey from Western Governors University. I interviewed them on my podcast recently. They do a series of surveys talking to students about their feelings about AI. And one of the latest data points was that 92% of students said it's important to know when they are interacting with AI. But I think about 50%, somewhere in that range, said that they didn't always know, that it wasn't made clear to
Mm.
them. So they're not getting the transparency that they want. So I think when students say we need transparency, it's important to listen, and especially when it comes to AI.
Well, I agree. And because you published an article I wrote called the EdTech Navigator, which was featured on previous episodes of this show. And it's one where I am a big advocate for strategic planning around technology because it changes so quickly. And AI is making it what I used to think about as hardware technology shift. Now it's on the software and application side, shifting faster. Hardware is an enabler, not necessarily the driver. And I think it becomes more important to make that planning process integral to the way that campuses think about technology in whole, that it's AI and the classroom experience or the student union experience or the residence hall experience. All of those have various technology applications to them. And I think are critical to the way, if we're going to be successful in raising the next generation of experts and learners that come into the workplace, that they're
Yeah.
enabled. I think that's a whole nother conversation about AI in the workplace and what that does, how that transforms the way we do our jobs.
Mhm. Yeah, well, the technology changing so fast, I mean, just really like any other tech like strategic planning effort, really it's an iterative process, right? So
Right.
you have to make sure when you have this AI steering committee or task force that they're meeting regularly. I don't know if it would be too much to expect once a week, but I've talked to universities that definitely make an effort to revisit all of their AI regulations every semester at least, so that you're updating the whatever the rules are gonna be, um, it's a kind of convenient chunk of time, I suppose.
I agree. I advocate for a standing strategic technology committee that works with academic student life and operations to evaluate emerging technologies. Unfortunately, not enough campuses invest in this type of planning, and technology often becomes only a footnote in their overall strategies.
So, final thoughts. I always close this podcast with a signature question where you get to put on your science fiction hat. What comes after what comes next? Whether that's in the convergence of AI learning environments and campus technology, what does your crystal ball say looking, I don't know, 10 years forward?
I've asked that question to people too, and they refuse to answer based on 10 years. It was too far.
Okay.
But I won't put a number of years on it, but I will go out on a limb and talk about virtual reality. It's another thing. It's like something old becoming new again. And I think it's returning to the forefront and it's going to be really taken to the next level by AI. So I'm sure you're familiar with Dreamscape Learn. This is a project that came out of Arizona State University. They partnered with a VR entertainment company way back when called Dreamscape Immersive, and their goal was to bring like the storytelling of movies into like an advanced pedagogical like immersive experience that had real learning outcomes. So they have a couple of like I think there's like an alien planet biology course, but it's all very like stunning visuals. But they've also done a lot of research documenting the positive impact on learning outcomes. And, just slowly over time, I keep noticing they're getting partners with more and more institutions. Very popular with community colleges.
Mhm.
And so adoption's just been growing in the background, and I think it's just something that this is something that had a lot of early hype, and then, this was, ASU, they sort of, like, hit on a way to make it really work,
Re-
and it's growing into something that's gonna have a big impact. I actually interviewed the CIO of ASU last year, Lev Gonick, and at the time, he said they were working on integrating AI into that virtual environment. I haven't seen anything about that coming to fruition quite yet, but the idea was that, when students are participating in that VR experience, they could have like an AI study partner in there with them that could sort of prompt them, engage them, answer questions. So just incredible potential there with that convergence of AI and VR.
I agree. And I have been talking about the same thing for a number of years because we do a lot of work in simulation space design, particularly for medical, nursing, allied health, dental, veterinary medicine, all using various levels of AR and VR in small scope, but that could be expanded into larger with a greater investment in that. If we're starting to build out AR studios or VR studios to support that kind of education in those departments. And I think we'll see more growth. And I do agree that AI will be an implementer for that. So thank you for your perspective and your leadership in the publication world of things technology related to education. You have a podcast. Where can listeners hear it?
Yeah, so my podcast is called Campus Technology Insider. It's on, all the major podcast platforms, but you could also find it at campustechnology.com. So whatever way works for you, you can find it.
Great. Great. Well, again, thanks. And to gain more insights from Rhea, look up Campus Technology, the journal,
No, it's our K through 12 publication, Technology Horizons in Education.
and Spaces number for Learning, Spaces for Learning, which I am writing for on a regular basis now. So watch for that too. Until next time, keep imagining better designed and tech enabled learning worlds. You'll read more about them in all of Rhea's magazines and online resources.
And thanks to our audience for joining us. Please follow and comment and share with your friends and colleagues. And thank you to the EdUp Experience team for your support. You can learn more at edupexperience.com. Until next time, let's keep building smart space together.